Okay, let's start. uh, First, welcome to come here for this IAS Distinguished Lecture Series. Today's talk will be presented by our senior fellow, Professor Toby Marks. Professor Marks and me actually went back more than 30 years, okay, as a good friends. So it's my honor and also my privilege to introduce him. So, Professor Marks received his BS from the University of Maryland and then his PhD from MIT. Okay, so during his career, he received more than 250 awards and also recognitions. So if I read all his awards, then whole seminar I will be just reading whole series, the list of his awards, right? So he really the world expert in several distinguished fields, right? In material chemistry, in catalysis, in organic metallic chemistry, all the different area, and each area he has done wonderful work, okay, in that. So he published more than 1,500 papers and have 210 patents, right? Okay, so from his award, I just chose few to let you know. He received the highest scientific award from the United States. That's a National Science Medal, okay, from U.S. President. And then he is also Academy member of the Academy of Engineering and also Academy of Science and also Academy of Arts and Sciences. Okay, so he also received as an Academy member from all the different countries, right? So among all those 250 awards, then from Israel, from Italy, from so many different countries. Okay, I cannot give all of them. So one of the thing I would like to emphasize, right? So besides, he is a great scientist, published more than 1,500 papers. Then he is also the expert in technology translation, right? So he involved in 15 startup company, and then the work he generated from his patent or from his discovery, right? The product worth more than 100 billion US dollars. Okay, so so this is give you some indication. Not only very good in the fundamental science, but extremely excellent in technology translation. So with that said, please join me to welcome Professor Toby Marks.
Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be at Citi today and for 10 days. And I look forward to meeting a lot of people and interacting with them. And it's a great honor to be a member of the HKIS. And I thought about what I could talk about today, and I thought this would be one of great popular interest because it affects the whole world. I'm just looking at making sure I don't forget my memory stick. It's not like forgetting things because they're on the memory stick. And what I wanted to talk about today is a problem that confronts almost every human being on the face of the earth, and that is polymers and waste polymers. This is just, it's awesome to think there are billions of tons of plastics that people just throw away. They don't know what to do with. And the question is what to do with them, and are there good scientifically founded ways to deal with this problem? And okay, that's the wrong one. So for example, just looking at the oceans and rivers and looking at some of these statistics here, 8 million tons of plastics, 12 to 13 million tons of plastic waste. And at the current rate, by 2050, there'll be more, the weight of plastics in the ocean will be more than the weight of fish. And the worst offenders, in other words, the worst of these plastics are polyolefins. Usually in a lecture I look at for a polyolefin. I don't see one here, but no big deal. PET, the plastic water bottles, and nylons. And the grand challenge is ultimately what we'd like to be able to do is take these waste polymers and convert them back into something useful, either a better polymer, the same polymer. And what I want to talk about today is catalysis as a way to deal with these problems. So by catalysis, just for the general public, whoops, sorry, what did I do? I think we all learn about this in middle school, elementary school, maybe daycare center. But the idea here, we all learn that what a catalyst does is lower the activation energy for a reaction. But it's much more than that, because how does it do that? We can't answer that. And in fact, when you start looking at what the catalyst does, is expressed by some mechanism, atomic level description of what the atoms are doing, what the molecules are doing with the catalyst. And there are homogeneous catalysts, solution phase, and usually their structure is very well defined. Biological catalysts, also sort of solution-like, structures are pretty well defined because they're individual catalytic centers. On the other hand, the classic catalysts for lots of industry are heterogeneous catalysts, and they're very thermally stable. They can be very, very cheap. But actually, to define what the active sites are and how they work has always been a great challenge. Now, you might say, so what? I mean, catalyst work is, not 21st century work. But in fact, today, catalysts and catalytic products account for about 30% of the world GDP, and the impact on human health and well-being is absolutely enormous, whether it's the Haber-Bosch process for ammonia, the catalytic converter, pharmaceuticals, asymmetric catalysis, fine chemicals, new materials. So it's very, very important. It's very important to our daily life. And in fact, you might say, yeah, but where's the intellectual content? Where's the impact? Well, this is one good illustration of the impact. Look at all of the people who received Nobel Prizes for doing research in catalysis, which has changed our lives, has changed our technology. So what do I mean by recycling a polymer? So imagine starting with products, going back to monomers, the building blocks of polymers, and then repolymerizing them. And if one could do this, they would really do it efficiently, there would be an enormous impact. So what I'm going to talk about today, let me just show you. I'm going to talk a little bit about PET. Speak of the devil, here's PET. And then we're going to talk about nylon. And all of these, if you think of it, these are really tough materials. You just don't, dissolve this in water. And the same with nylon, extremely robust. And if you think nylon is hard, what about a polyolefin? So this is probably a polyolefin. In fact, this is PET, but this is a polyolefin. The cap is a polyolefin. Whoops, sorry, what have I done? And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about polycarbonates. So let's talk about PET. And currently, what do people do to recycle it? Well, first of all, you have to separate these two. How to do that? There's no really good way to do that except by grinding everything up and just melting it and making it into some plastic. But it loses all of the optical properties, the transparency, the mechanical properties. And globally, about half of PET is not collected for recycling. and only 7% is recycled bottle to bottle. And so can it be done catalytically? What process would you use? And this then will introduce us to what are called single-site heterogeneous catalysts. So as I said already, homogeneous catalysts have these well-defined structures, but they're not really stable. Whereas on the other hand, heterogeneous catalysts have poorly defined structures, but are very, very stable. So suppose I combine both of them. And what I'm going to do is take a molecular precursor, a very cheap metal, earth-abundant metal, and support it. And in this particular talk, I'm going to support it on activated carbon, charcoal. Pretty ill-defined structure. And I get a material that a catalyst I propose has this structure. Now you might say, how the heck do you know that? How do you characterize a black stuff with a molybdenum on it? So we use every technique you can imagine: IR, Raman, solid state NMR, ESR, ESR, XPS, XRD, et cetera, to try to find out what is happening. And I'm going to sort of lead you through the process of this particular one with a very ill-defined support to some things that I think are going to really surprise you. So first of all, what does it do? What do these catalysts do? Well, for example, if I react them with biomass, bioalcohols, it produces hydrogen, and we'll talk more about that. It can be used for transesterification, carbonyl coupling, and other reductions. So, and it's air stable. It can be recycled. These can be recycled multiple times. But as I said, the support is very ill-defined. So now let's look at a support that is better defined. And this is graphene oxide. And it has a surface structure pretty much like this. And again, all the physical techniques we applied imply this is the structure. For example, this is XAFS, which is an X-ray scattering technique. This is also a DFT model. And if you sort of say, yeah, but this is all hand waving. So compare the XAFS structural data with the DFT and the experimental vibrational spectroscopy compared to the DFT. And what you conclude is, in fact, this is a pretty well-defined structure. And you can do a titration that leads you to conclude that 70% of the sites are catalytically significant. Just a word or two about the different students. Joshi is now working for Wiley, so she may be the editor for one of the manuscripts you submit. She works for Small, and she may be smiling, but she's very tough. So what about PET? So the Tracy Lohr, who I showed you, the last thing she did when she left the lab to say goodbye, she pointed at me and said, PET. So Yossi Kradic is a very talented postdoc experimentally, but also entrepreneurially and theoretically. So we're saying, what solvent should we use to try to do this reaction? And we basically looked at each other and say, why do we need a solvent? When we melt the plastic, it will be the solvent. So this is PET. Now at the beginning, so how do you grind up the PET? We used a cheese grater that you use for cheese. Now we have something much more sophisticated. And what happens is you reach the point where the PET melts, and this is the reaction here. So it's PET goes to terephthalic acid and ethylene, and very high yields. And the PTA is very, very pure, so no solvent. And lots of the processes, industrial processes that are struggling to recycle PET, the problem is dealing with all the waste solvent and water and things like that. So there's no problem here. And there's one other thing that's very interesting. So first of all, so this catalyst selectively catalyzes PET hydrogenolysis, so there's some hydrogen here. But what about this guy? The top is polypropylene, it's a polyolefin. How do you ever separate those? Well, all you do is put them in the reactor, the PTA comes out, and the polypropylene is unchanged. So the catalytic process has done this very economically challenging separation very easily. Well, what more can we learn about this catalyst? So I won't go through the mechanism in detail. This is Yanshan Gao's work. He's now at SIOC. But basically, from the, let me maybe show you a little more. So basically, the mechanism involves coordination of this is work that Yanshan did with this diester and then the DFT. So the next step is to cleave a carbon-carbon bond, and we get a kinetic isotope effect, which is two ways to check your DFT calculation. One is the activation energy. Is the experimental and calculated one similar? That's easy to do. The other is kinetic isotope effects. Are they the calculated and real agree? And then there's a process that kicks off a benzoic acid, and then you follow it through, and there's a nucleophilic attack, and you kick out another Bronsted acid and ethylene, sorry. And we can do some model reactions that verify the mechanism. So we understand that pretty well. But yet, we want to learn more about the catalyst and the structure of the catalyst. So this is Ichi Nakamura at the University of Tokyo. And he has a kind of electron microscope. There's only one in the world. It's called a SMART, single molecule atomic resolution real-time microscopy. And one of the secrets is to put whatever you're looking at on a piece of, he calls it a carbon nanotube, and it's like a carbon nanotube. So it's almost X-ray transparent. And we do all of these control experiments to make sure that the catalyst on the carbon nanohorn is the same as the catalyst on our other carbon supports. And here you can see the carbon molecules here, the molybdenum molecules here. And now let's use it on a real reaction. And the real reaction we're going to use is one that Tracy Lohr discovered. And this is, I mentioned already, and this is to take ethanol and do this cycle to kick off an aldehyde and hydrogen. And it's very fast. And so what Nakamura found, here's one of the catalysts sitting on one of these catalysts, and we add an iodine here, which has a higher atomic number for better scattering of the X-rays, and you can see it here. And what's interesting, if you look at it carefully, it looks like, so this is an individual catalyst entity, and you can see the first step in the catalytic cycle. Remember, this is the one I showed you that we proposed. The first step is to add the ethanol to the molybdenum oxygen double bond, and this is exactly what we see here. And the next step is it kicks off an aldehyde which oligomerizes, and what you can see here is the polymer actually growing at the tip of the nanohorn. And if you sort of say, gee, I'm not really sure you form an oligomer, so here's the mass spec of that mixture, and you can see the oligomers. So now I want to switch catalytic metals. We've looked at molybdenum, and there's a paper coming out on tungsten as well. And now I want to switch to this part of the periodic table, the rare earths. And your first thought is, oh, everyone calls them rare earths. They must be really rare. No, they're not. It's just historical. They have very large ionic radii. I mean, it's like comparing a basketball to a softball in terms of ionic radii, and it's tunable. So as I cross the lanthanide series, it contracts, so I can I can pull the ligands in or push them away and change the chemistry. So ligands go on and off very rapidly, exactly what you want for a catalyst. And these metals are more abundant than nickel and copper, so they're really not rare. And they're very good catalysts. So let me show you one reaction I want to talk about today, and that's nylon. And you see these pictures, and these are real. This is a discarded fishing net. There are tons, and so every year nylons are produced at this level, and they're very not. The calculation is to biodegrade nylon takes about 600 years. And they compose about 10% of the ocean plastic, and that's like 6 million tons per year. And they require that. And there's currently no really good recycling way of deconstructing nylon. And so we set out to do that. And I'll get into some of the details, but it's very much like the PET. We're going to use a reactor, a catalyst, and no solvent. And the caprolactam just sublimes right out, and you get it as very pure crystals. And if you say, well, there's probably no real mechanism going on. Well, so as I change and we'll start with this catalyst, and then go to this one, and then to this one, the rate increases by 10,000-fold. And you can see as I change the ionic radius of the lanthanide, the rate slows down. So we want a large ionic radius, and let's get into the mechanism and then some of the ramifications. Incidentally, when we first published this, there was a lot of publicity, the first deconstruction of nylon this way, and I got an email from the mayor of a small town on the coast of Alaska who said their whole waterfront was just inundated with discarded fishing nets. And he said to me, well, if you send me some of your catalyst, can I sort of sprinkle it on the fishing nets and they'll go away? And no, it's not quite that simple. He said, well, if you ever want, I also run a tour boat company. So if you ever want to visit my part of the coast of Alaska, I'll give you a free tour. So keep that in mind if you're working on nylon. So here's the mechanism. And the first step then is coordination of the end. We call it the Pac-Man mechanism. It just chomps away on the nylon chain, and when it gets to the end, it jumps to another chain. So the first step then is forming this kind of structure. And then there's an intramolecular nucleophilic attack of this amino group, it's actually an amide, to the carbon of the carbonyl group. And then the next step is it dissociates and caprolactam comes out, and then another chain starts. And this is the energy profile. So the transition state 2 is the turnover limiting step. And these are just showing the intermediates. So these are the different transition states are numbered. And this is just showing what's going on as an atom. As this transfer here occurs, or this one, or that, or the one at the right. So we understand that pretty well, but where do we go from here? So this is Li Wei-Ye's work. And the first thing, if you talk to practical people, they say, well, it has to be recyclable. So this is just showing you recycling. We just add, but there's a bigger message here, and that is what you like industrially is a continuous process. You really don't want to have a big pot. You throw the stuff in, stir it up, and take the product out. You want continuously to be feeding the nylon and continuously turning it over. And so we simulated this by just adding fresh nylon to the reactor periodically. And this just shows you that he's done 6 additions and the yield is the same. So it's all set to do a continuous process, and we're working on that now. And this just shows you what the caprolactam looks like. It just comes right out of the reactor, no solvent. So then what about let's go back to this mixed plastic. And a lot of people working in this field don't want to talk about that. So we'll get into that, but first let's try kinds of nylon you run into every day. So carpet. So where did Li Wei get the carpet? He went to the Home Depot company and said, I'm thinking of recarpeting my apartment. Could I get some carpet samples? They said, sure. So, and then nylon yarn, I think this came from the Singer sewing machine company. I mean, you have to put it into the reactor ground up. Here's a nylon t-shirt, and this is the yield of caprolactam, so very, very good. And now let's look at some mixtures. So these medical gloves were all over the place during the pandemic, and the Amazon said it contains 31% nylon. Just, we don't know what the other polymers are, but nothing comes out except caprolactam. Or let's take waste fishing net and polyethylene bottle caps. And what happens is the nylon is degraded, and the polyolefin is unchanged. So can we make it circular? So this is Kristen Beckett's work. So the top is the NMR of the fishing net. And I think the solvent, I think it's DMSO. And then we do the deconstruction to get the caprolactam, and we repolymerize the caprolactam, and you can see that it's, in fact, the molecular weight, this is by GPC, of the repolymerized stuff is higher than the quality of the fishing net. Where do you get used fishing net? Well, it turns out if you own a seafood restaurant, you probably want to get some fishing nets to decorate the restaurant. And so that's the big commercial application for used fishing net. Let me now turn to the 800-pound gorilla, and that's polyolefins. And so the global market for and that means polyethylene, polypropylene, and copolymers, is going to hit $600 billion in 2030. It's about 25% of all the plastics resin sold in the US. It's used for automobiles, lightweight, strong automobile bumpers, parts, biomedical, artificial limbs and joints, energy storage, solar, to cover solar panels, PPEs. All of the PPEs you wore or are wearing today, say this young man here, do you know what it's made out of? That's right, isotactic polypropylene. And millions and millions and millions of those masks. And how do you make polyolefins? Well, one way that we work on is using a homogeneous catalyst. And this is an example. It's a Dow Chemical. And if you tune the properties of this little molecule, and it can polymerize millions of equivalents of monomer of, say, ethylene, or ethylene and one octene. You can make, and each of these has different properties. So this one has good flexibility. This one is a very good lubricant. This one, which we've made now, has polar groups, which you can functionalize for, say, antibacterial activity. So what we're interested in is new catalytic properties in polymer science. But as people said to me, well, hey, you guys figured out how to make all of these polymers. Can you figure out how to deconstruct them? One other thing about polyolefins. So this is a graph of life cycle environmental impact for all kinds of commercial polymers, including bio-derived ones. And here's PET, and you want to be high on here, and you want to be far along here. This is adherence to green design principles. So polycarbonate, PVC, whoops, are bad. But amazingly, polyolefins look very good. They're cheap. All you need is to take shale gas and crack it and get olefins. They're very cheap. They're non-toxic, and they come out very high on this graph. They're not the ultimate. When this was made, people didn't have any idea of how you could take polyolefins apart in any efficient way. But today, I think people are thinking, and I mentioned my ex-postdoc Eugene Chen, who's done absolutely amazing work to try to develop intrinsically recyclable polymers. We're not there yet. One group, German group, has a polymer to do that. It only required 17 synthetic steps. I would argue that until we get here, probably the best bet, the best transition polymers are going to be polyolefins. And in fact, you can make them from sugarcane and from agricultural waste. So just keep that in mind. But could we deconstruct them? Could we take one of our catalysts? And the idea was to have a very strong Bronsted acid. When it's reacted with this early transition metal alkyl, some of the zirconium carbon bonds are cleaved, protonalized, to get something that we sort of envisioned would look like that. And then we wanted to see whether it could, under hydrogen, cleave polyolefins. And so we started with hexadecane. And I proposed this idea to a couple different graduate students and postdocs. They said, it'll never work. It'll never. There's another one of the boss's crazy ideas. Alex had courage, and he tried that. And the proof of concept was to see if this catalyst, so it's absorbed, a very strong Bronsted acid, remember, means that the conjugate base of a strong Bronsted acid is a weak base. So this is, then these ligands are very weakly bound, probably more electrostatically than anything else, to the zirconium, okay? And so I said, let's do this reaction. We're gonna take the hexadecane and some of our catalyst, and let's do it in a very simple glass vessel. So we can, why glass? Because among other things, you can look in there and see what's going on, and check the stirring, and we'll do all sorts of things to characterize the catalyst. And so, okay, I'm going to show you an actual experiment. Now this is a hot plate with oil in it. So oops, sorry, let's go back. I don't want to break the, so this is the reaction then. You're going to see a white powder, and that's the catalyst, immersed in a liquid, hexadecane. We're going to stir and pretty low pressure, hydrogen pressures, and low temperature, and watch. And this is showing the time. The hexadecane is completely gone under these very, very mild conditions. I'll do it once more just so you can see. In fact, this is the kind of thing you want to show to a program manager in Washington. I mean, it's only 150 C, and in 18 minutes, it's all gone. So, and so what we say, there's no, a lot of the platinum metal catalysts that's like the Santa Barbara group are using, you look at the reactor and it's just full of black stuff, and that's called coking. All kinds of carbonaceous deposits. This is very, very clean chemistry. So let's see how far, well, first of all, what's going on? What is on the surface? And so this is a collaboration with the Ames, Iowa DOE lab, but Takeshi Kobayashi is sort of the NMR samurai. And you mentioned the catalytics, the NMR cycle, and multinuclear, multidimensional, and he can actually pull apart everything that's on the surface. And we combine that with DFT and with XAF scattering, and we know a lot about the structure. But what do they do? I mean, the world can't stop with a glass vessel. So this is an autoclave, and this is the work of Carter Edenfield. And the turnover frequencies under the conditions, pretty much like I showed you, a little bit higher temperature, higher pressure, are 36,000 turnovers per hour. So it's really, really fast. And I'll show you some more results. Commercial polymers have additives, small amounts of antioxidants and other stuff. Doesn't seem to have a very large effect. This is Qinghai and Lai. And so what about commercial things? So we took this, people said, oh boy, this pigment, the coloring in that plastic is going to kill your catalyst. Has no effect of all other than turning the catalyst blue. But it works very well, and this is just showing GCMS of some of the lighter weight fractions. And Ching Heng was able to hydrogenyze milk jugs, Ziploc bags, isotactic polypropylene, clothing, face masks. So the face mask he's wearing there, don't put it in our reactor because it'll be gone. And if you tune the catalyst right, you can get different fractions. You can get waxes or you can get oils. And let's see, I don't know whether I have to click on this too. So I know it sounds like if your professor ever said to you, why don't you make a candle? But I thought, let me find the cursor. Yeah, there we go. So Carter made a candle. And so the annual sales in the United States per year of candles is something like $6 billion worth of candles. And you might wonder whether people would want to have candles which were made from recycled plastic. We'll find out. Let me tell you a little bit. Stop. So what's going on here? What is the mechanism? So this is Italian collaborator Alessandro Mata. So we argued, was the mechanism a force center mechanism like this? Or was it something more exotic like a beta alkyl transfer? And of course the professor voted for this and was wrong. But it's this. So the DFT shows us that what's happening in the first step is you activate a CH bond to make a zirconium carbon bond, and then there's a beta alkyl transfer, and that splits out olefin. And of course, under these conditions, the olefin will be hydrogenated or captured by the zirconium hydride and then hydrogenated. And the thermodynamics and everything, and the experimental activation energy is about 21, and the DFT says 18. So that's very good agreement. So you really can begin to see how these catalysts work. And then the question is, so the beta alkyl transfer is the highest hump on the reaction surface, and that's the turnover limiting step. So Ching Heng then wondered, what about tantalum? So that's on the next column of the periodic table, and it works fine. It's probably a little more thermally stable, and this just has to do with sort of his methodology from separating the waxes, the gases, and then of course we need to quantitate the yield and what's called mass balance, and that works out pretty well. Pico is a commercial Dow product that it's a copolymer of ethylene and 1-octene, for example. And so he did water bottle caps, sandwich bags, milk jugs, and mixtures of plastics. So he could take a sandwich bag, milk jug, and others and mix them all together and process all of them. And this is just showing the hafnium analog of the zirconium. It looks pretty much the same. But what Yossi did, you notice that all of these catalysts that I showed you are cationic. They're very strong electrophiles. So what would happen, let's imagine, here's our hafnium on sulfated aluminum. If I just had a neutrally charged hafnium with 2 methoxy ligands as the ligands. So it's neutral, so this is a cation, the blue, the red is neutral. And sorry, let me go back. And you can see the activation energy for the neutral compound is enormously higher than the cationic. Now, let me go one step further in terms of the mechanism. And that is, a purist would say, wait a minute, you've got this supported catalyst all swimming around in this big glob of goo of the polymer. How can you really understand the details of the mechanism? So we're going to do now, we're going to use a model polyolefin propane, and this is a heterogeneous. It's called it's a bench CAD. It's made by Altamira. So it's an automated system where you can automatically program the temperature, the flow rate, and everything like that. And what you see here is we duplicate what we see in the big mix of polymer, but we can get the kinetics out, and now we really know what's going on here. And so, for example, the rate law is this weird thing that varies with the hydrogen pressure. And it turns out to be a very simple explanation. And I won't go through all of this. This is a lot to digest. But it's a competition between the beta alkyl elimination and the hydrogenolysis. And so that's why the rate law is fractional, depending on how much hydrogen you have. So we really understand this. And the calculation of the activation energies is very close to experimental. And so then you say, well, what is the lifetime of this catalyst? It probably just lasts for a couple of minutes. So we can extrapolate here, and it looks like it's hundreds of hours. And so the turnover, at least 92,000 turnovers. And so that means it's practical for industry. Okay, so now just a couple on polycarbonates. Global market size, big, used in all kinds of, especially really high impact plastics. And the two classes are these aromatic ones. This stuff you can hit with a hammer and it won't break. And these aliphatic ones are also emerging as important because of you can use CO2 to make them. So this is Li Wei's work. Li Wei comes again, and he discovered that depending on the depolymerization conditions, you can either get it, I won't get into the details, to go this way or that way. So it's called chemodivergence. It's sensitive to the size of the lanthanide ion. So again, we've seen this kind of behavior. And this just shows running it in a way that gives us this product or that product. And this is Li Wei and Kristen. And then, and this is just being revised for Angewandte. So what happens now if I take a mixture, this is a real whammy, you might say, of the polycarbonate, and I'll mix it with nylon, and I'll mix it with polyethylene. I'll just mix the whole thing up and put one catalyst in, and we raise it to one temperature, one of these lanthanide amides, and this monomer comes out, and nylon and polyethylene are left behind. Oops, sorry. And now we raise the temperature more, and the caprolactam comes out, leaving the polyolefin. So you have separated three different polymers. And that's really hard to imagine doing with a bunch of solvent extractions and things like that. Okay, so let's wrap it up. So to summarize, carbon is an interesting support for catalysis. So many people around the world use palladium on charcoal to hydrogenate things. Nobody has any idea how the palladium is bound to the charcoal. And so with enough physical methods, it's really easy, not easy, but challenging, but you can figure out what the structure of the catalyst is. It is molybdenum dioxide on carbon, and now we've done tungsten dioxide, is really very versatile, air stable, multiple recycles possible. In fact, even continuous process for nylon. Single site catalysts, as we saw with the polyolefins. So there's a sort of the actors in the story here are really intricate and can be made extremely active. And the other thing to point out to everybody, you go to a lecture, it's amazing to think over the last few years how great the advances in physical and theoretical characterization techniques have advanced, and catalysts are no longer black boxes. They're things that we can use, manipulate, and that's the bottom line of all of this. If we truly understand a catalyst, we can engineer an even better one. So these are the people who have participated over about the last decade or two. We're on the shores of Lake Michigan, and you can see the Chicago skyline. Very international, culturally rich city there, and lots of collaborators from all over the world. And all of these funding agencies, of course, were important in our journey. And finally, the big acknowledgement is to these people here. And we do not discriminate on the basis of age here. But she's not a postdoc yet. No, this is daughter of Yossi here. So people from all over the world. There are people here from China, Korea, Turkey, India, the US. If I left out, I think that's it. That's it. Italy, and we do a whole bunch of different things, and we have a lot of fun doing it. And this is just the picture was taken on the lakeshore, so you can see Lake Michigan behind us there. So with that, thank you very much for the invitation and coming to the lecture, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Marks, for the wonderful talk. Right. So now the forum is open for questions. Any question from the audience? Yes. Oh.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Marks. Really inspiring talk. Particularly, I'm impressed by your work on polyethylene depolymerization to recycle the useful materials. One for your result showed that the volatile is the major product.
The what?
Volatile.
Volatile.
Yeah.
It depends on, you can tune the catalyst and the properties. If you want oils, you can get oils. If you want volatile, you can get those. You can make candles.
Yeah, yeah. If
you
you prefer to have the oil or, for example, DCM extract, if you prefer that, how you can control the time or temperature to get
and
more
hydrogen
oil.
pressure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the maximum oil yield you can achieve?
I'd have to go back of just the oily product.
Okay.
Probably, because all of those have commercial value, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
If you get gas, you can send it to the cracker.
Yeah, because nowadays people actually more interested in oil for sustainable aviation fuel.
True.
They want to produce the liquid fuel from.
I don't think there's any problem there.
Okay.
And we, as I showed you also, in another process, we made highly branched polyolefins, and my colleague Jane Wang, who's an expert in tribology, we partnered together and we showed they were really, really good lubricants. And so then industry came to us and said, yeah, this looks really good. Can you send us 50 gallons? How do we make 50 gallons?
Difficult in a lab.
In an academic lab.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I just have a comment on this page. It's very diversified picture, a very diversified group. As you work on a lot of catalysts. Maybe you want to have also a cat on these photos?
A cat.
Yeah, a cat. Maybe a dog. Yeah.
Actually, Yossi has a cat. I guess we could put the cat in the picture also.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Anyway.
So we don't discriminate on terms of animals in the group either. No pythons or alligators or anything like that.
Yeah, I got another question on the selectivity of the catalyst for your polyolefins decomposition. So it seems that you can activate all the CH bond and break down into really efficient. So will be the product, as the time going on, will be the product all goes into like methane or ethylene products, or you can have some selectivity for
yes
the
and
carbon.
no, it's interesting. So the ones that go by the beta alkyl elimination, if you actually write the mechanism it cannot form methane. And so we feed it to ethane and nothing happens. It's very interesting and very, very selective. That's for zirconium. When we go to tantalum, on the other hand, you get a lot of methane also. And probably because tantalum is also a good olefin metathesis catalyst. And we've got something more exciting, but it's been accepted to Nature Chemistry pending some revisions. And it's at a different part of the periodic table, but hopefully we'll be able to talk about that.
Yeah, because I
shortly.
think you mentioned something about it's a very strong brown star acid. So, like, do you think like those because it's more like you have the metal inorganic part. Do you think any organic brown star acid, those super acid, would be like useful for those?
We've tried a lot. We've tried a lot of zeolites, and it seems that the sulfated oxide from the DFT, it sort of forms a cup with the metal cation inside. And remember, a strong Bronsted acid, the conjugate base will be a very weak base. Yeah. So we think, we've got the Zanes, we've got lots of data. It's very, very cationic, very electrophilic. The question is, on other parts of the periodic table, can we find similar things? But I can tell you that every zeolite we've tried, ZSM5 and zeolite Y and all of those, for reasons we don't understand, don't do it. The good news is sulfated oxides are really cheap. And as you know, so UOP makes sulfated zirconia. And it was very funny. So they gave us a sample, and I said, gee, your sulfated zirconia gives a much more active catalyst than the sulfated zirconia we make. And the guy just winked and said, I know. But wouldn't tell us what the secret was.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your great talk. I work with textiles, and in textiles, the most common blend is polyester cotton blend. So polycotton blend is most prevalent in the market. So if you
I don't know whether this is cotton polyester.
Most likely, yes.
But I will, just to divert for just a second. Yeah. So in the hotel now, the toothbrushes are made out of wood. Mm. But what is the bristle made of? I would bet you it's nylon.
Nylon, yeah, most likely. So with the polyester cotton blends, given the huge volume of it, and if you apply your catalyst to a blend product like polyester cotton, would the catalyst do anything to the cotton component, which is the cellulose?
We've done that experiment. I know we've done nylon cotton, and there you can get the nylon deconstruct. It doesn't do anything to the cotton, but I don't remember the result. It wasn't 100% successful though. But yeah, I mean, the critics say, not the critics, but the industrial people that say, oh, fishing nets, that's easy. And I say, but what if it's mixed with a polyolefin? And they don't tell me. but when you get to nylons mixed with other blends, so for an academic, to me, it's very amusing to have a Zoom call with the research and development staff of, how many of the students have heard of Lululemon? Yeah. So, well, the name came because it's very difficult, I think, for Japanese to pronounce L's. So they remember that. So in any case, yeah, we know a lot about blends, and we've worked with a number of companies to solve the blend problems, or the mixtures.
Any other question?
Take your polypropylene mask.
Thank you so much.
Except
Professor
I think the
Max.
elastic is not polypropylene.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah. For your impressive lectures, and have a question about your first catalyst is molybdenum oxide on the carbon spot. So you said it's a single site molybdenum oxide, actually, is there some difference between this kind of mobiler oxide with the bulk immobilier oxide? So if you
Yes, in
have the
terms of
same-
the catalytic behavior, it's different. And in terms of the, for example, we can titrate, Ichi Lu did it, and we can titrate and determine what percentage of the sites are catalytically active. And and it's about 70%. And most heterogeneous catalytic chemists, one thing you should never ask them is what percentage of their sites are catalytically active. Because in a huge number of cases, they don't know. In cases where they know, it's frequently 10%, 5%. So the good part about the single site is that usually a high percentage are catalytically active. And if you're trying to figure out a mechanism, it's much easier.
Thank you.
Any other question? If no other question, then I have one request, right? So in the past more than 30 years, I have been running with you to work on nonlinear optical materials, working on organic field effect transistors, and working on organic solar cells, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also we were also working on some transparent conductors. Okay, so you have done all excellent work in all those areas, right? So, but then I know you also have contributed tremendously to industry about the catalysis, okay, making the polyolefin, the Dow Chemical, all those companies, right? So, with all of that said, right, we are all focused on working on very sophisticated material, right? Okay, some non-optical chromophore,
Right, sure.
all the wonderful molecules or polymers. So, how did you come up with the idea to really working on some of this very simple polymers, right? And then you find a group of guys, okay, right, to working on this field. But then, this is totally against our conventional thoughts, right? Because working on those conventional polymer, polycarbonate, nylon, all those things, right? But you still managed to publish paper in all the top journal in chemistry journal, in JACS, Engelmann and Nature Chemistry or PNAS. So, how did you do that?
Well, how did I make that mistake? Well, sometimes it's you see something that intrigues you. Which just an anecdotal story is Dow Chemical said, we got this big grant from DARPA to look at organic transistors. And we thought we should get some academics involved. Are you interested? And they said, there's this guy in England named Richard Friend. We don't know him, but is he good? And I said, he is really, really good. And so things like that happen. I mean, someday, hopefully, they'll make so many of our electroactive polymers that we'll need to worry about recycling them. But already, people in that field are very worried about developing green ways to make them, to replace all the platinum or all the Suzuki type palladium with something that's more earth abundant. And so, sorry, but it looks like fluorocarbons are going to go out. So all of our polymers with CF3 groups and things like that may someday be forbidden. I hope not, but so there is a convergence.
I look at your picture, right? You have one guy there. Look at very like Bill Gates.
It's not Bill Gates.
I thought you find a very good founder. Okay, so with that said, right? So please join me to thank Professor Toby Marks, okay, for the wonderful
talk. Thank you very
much.
Thank you for coming. I would like to make an announcement. We will be having an afternoon tea gathering session with Professor Marks on Wednesday at 4 p.m. at HKIAS. So for faculty members or students who would like to come and enjoy some casual chit-chat with Professor Marks, please come to me and register. Yes, thank
Last
you.
Year, last year it was very productive. When students wanted advice about careers, about things like that, and it was scheduled for 2 hours, and I think it went to almost 3. They didn't want to leave.
Yes, it's casual. So if you would like to come, please come to me and register. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.